name is Marco Stanici, and I've been asked to speak about my experience as a military member with the civilian population during my time in Afghanistan. Just to give some background about myself, I'm second generation born in the United States. My grandparents came from Ukraine. My family grew up in a Ukrainian household, and I was born with, basically raised with Ukrainian as my first language. And as time went on, I was born in Philadelphia, raised in the area, and then I joined the Marine Corps in December of 1998. I went to recruit training right after Christmas, and then served about just short of 22 years overall. And I was assigned different places, but the main thing I'm going to talk about is probably my experience in Afghanistan. And just to give some context, so when I got sent to Afghanistan, I was a combat engineer. I went with 8th Engineer Support Battalion, and our mission at that time was a realignment. So what's happening in 2012 is the United States is downsizing. And what the downsize looks for us as Marines on the ground is you have battalion battle spaces, which are now being reduced to company-sized battle spaces. We were the last battalion-sized engineer element to get sent to Afghanistan. And because of the downsizing, our tour of duty is actually cut short. We were supposed to be there 9 months to indefinitely, and which meant probably a year or so, and we were only cut short, so we were there from May till August. And it was a very busy time because we were doing a realignment. They call it a BRAC mission, which is ultimately what it is, a realignment. So what we're doing is, because of the downsizing, we're reinforcing certain patrol bases and tearing down other patrol bases. So the interaction is, the area is becoming less secure, right? You're having more gaps open, so the threat level's up. Also with the population, the way that we're trained, so coming from the United States, coming to Afghanistan, I guess General Mattis, what he said is, be polite, be professional, but have a plan to kill everyone that you meet. And what he means by that, right, some context into that is, it's reality, right? Because you have to be polite, professional, because the people can be your friends. But the same people that may seem to be your friends are the same people that may be plotting IEDs and wanting to kill you. So you have to be prepared to foster that relationship, right? Build a friendship and an alliance with those people, but also at the same time know that that could be the threat that you're facing. So it's very hard and it's nerve-wracking. And that's kind of the idea that's spent from the highest level to the lowest level, because most people who are in the Marine Corps, we're coming there because we want to help. We have this ideal situation that we want to come help these people who are in a dire situation, that are being basically oppressed by the Taliban. They give them an opportunity to have freedom. And in 2012, we've been present for quite some time, and the Taliban's still a viable fighting force, and we're downsizing at the same time. So I understand that the civilian population is also a little bit afraid of what's going to happen and unsure, and loyalties are being tested at the same time. When we leave, those people have to live there and live with the ramifications of who they support and what they do. And their actions are also going to be scrutinized by whoever comes in, by the vacuum that's going to be filled. So we left Camp, I was stationed at Camp Lejeune, so we left Camp Lejeune and, in May, and then we arrived to Manas in Kyrgyzstan. I believe it was an old Soviet air station. And we were there for about 10 days. That's kind of our relay area to fly into Afghanistan. And our first C-17 we flew on, which is supposed to be mechanically sound and the best aircraft, obviously had engine trouble. So we had to land back. So that was fantastic. And then, so we did land in Afghanistan finally. We landed at Camp Leatherneck, and Camp Bastion was the British side. That's where the airfield was. And Camp Bastion is famous for the breach that they had with the locals who broke through the wire and caused this single most deadliest loss of aircraft the Marine Corps faced since the Vietnam War. They destroyed a bunch of Harriers while they were still on the ground. And so with that happened right after I left. So part of our element was still present at Camp Leatherneck when that breach happened. And I can give you some details about how I'm not surprised that happened, because you had basically hemp fields growing up to the fence line. You can see that you drive down the road, you see hemp growing in the ditches. And my impression was that we destroyed all those things, and I guess that wasn't so. But we landed. It was dark when we came in. It was night, and so we were at Camp Leatherneck, which was basically a large fortified area, and it was a multinational force. So you had Jordanians there, you had the Danes there, people from Denmark, you had the Georgians, and a whole lot of the British. And it was just different that you see the type of equipment that we would travel in, right? The Afghans, their local forces were kind of in pickup trucks, while we were given MRAPs and MATVs, which are heavily armored vehicles, because of the Iranians giving the Iraqi insurgents as well as the Taliban different shape charges that can blow through those armored vehicles. We had V-shaped holes in the bottom, which is kind of designed to go against IED blasts, because that's kind of what we did as engineers. We would also, part of our job was counter IED operations, so we were trained for locating IEDs, and we didn't disarm or do anything like that. That was EOD, Explosives Ordnance and Disposal. It was those technicians who would do that, and we were trained and able to blow IEDs in place, but often we were asked not to blow them in place because they would use them for forensic evidence. So if you would find bomb-making materials, and eventually you found someone whose home had those similar materials, then you would find bomb makers. So that was kind of the idea of not wanting to blow things in place. My job, I was a security platoon commander. So the security platoon, my job was to make sure that all of our movements, basically to provide the security for all of our movements from point A to point B, and then once we arrived at the location, to provide the perimeter security for any type of assaults, because the way that engineer units would work is we're self-sufficient, right? They're not going to take the infantry to come babysit us and guard us. That we're supposed to be self-sufficient. So our job isn't like the infantry to locate, close with, and destroy the enemy. That's not our job. Our job is to build their patrol bases at that time. Our job was to build the patrol bases, tear down patrol bases. But once we got to a patrol base, we'd high five, they leave, go do their thing, and then we self-sustain ourselves and provide our own security. That's kind of what our mission was and what we were planning for. So we did have interaction with the civilian population, and my first interaction was, I remember being told at engineer school, you're never going to move at night. It's dangerous, you can't see at night. And the first thing we did is we were told you need to move at night because there's less traffic on the roads, and it's to avoid the civilian population. What amazed me was the use that the adults would use the children as kind of like a means to an end. So what happened is we were told, don't put much gear on the outside of your vehicles, keep everything inside of the vehicles. The Army, on the other hand, strapped stuff all over the place. They had these RPG cages on the outside of their vehicles, and the purpose of the RPG cages, RPG is a shape charge, and it's supposed to detonate a certain distance to maximize the effect of the blast. So the RPG cage is supposed to detonate it early to reduce the effectiveness of the blast. So they had these cages on the outside. The Marines didn't do that. I guess because it looks silly, so you have to look cool while you do your job, right? So we don't do that. But they would strap things to their cages, so what that basically did was parents would drive on these scooters and kids would jump off and try to steal things off the sides of the vehicles. But my first interaction is going out the gate of Camp Leatherneck. We're going to this place called Fob Shigvani. And Shigvani, we're expanding it. You have American forces there, but it's primarily a Georgian base, from not the state of Georgia, but the country of Georgia. The Georgians operate a lot differently, and their value of life compared to ours was different, because we would never move with less than 4 vehicles. That was kind of the standing operating procedure for us, but they would go alone. And we would get calls on the radio for the Georgians to conduct a vehicle recovery, because they had hit an IED and they were by themselves. And the strange thing about that is, if they're by themselves, they get concussed and they get lacerations, lose limbs, and there's no one to apply a tourniquet. So they were taking casualties and losing people who could have been saved if someone else can come in and apply that aid. So that's one thing about the Georgians that struck me, and they kept operating like that. They still do alone, and they would keep doing it. So that's just one thing about them. But as far as the civilians, I remember going out the gate of Leatherneck, and it was dark still. And then we finally hit Route 1, which is a paved highway. It will eventually become paved. The CBs, I believe the Army Corps of Engineers, are the ones that paved it. And then we turn off near this market, and we go on what's called Route Red, and it's a dirt road. And it gets really tight. There's a old cinder block, they basically make blocks. It's a concrete, it's not concrete, but cinder block making facility. So there's all these cinder blocks, and it's a tight area, and it's kind of a bottleneck. You don't want to be in bottlenecks. And what I learned is we call these kids the children of the corn, because you would have these wild kids that would come out and they kind of play chicken with these MRAPs. There's these heavy, several-ton vehicles, up-armored, and they have mine rollers on the front of them. And the purpose of the mine roller is obviously if there's an IED with a pressure plate in front of you, it would detonate the pressure plate and blow the mine roller. You lose some tires, but you don't have the blast underneath the vehicle. And eventually what they would do is they would put the pressure plate where the mine roller would be and backlay the IED about 20 feet back so it'd still blow up underneath the vehicle. So again, adapting tactics and things. And they would also go to something called crush plates. So they knew the vehicle commanders wouldn't be in the front vehicle. They'd only be about the 5th, 6th back. And what they would try to do is put a crush plate. So basically every time a vehicle goes over it, it crushes it a little bit more, reduces the material, so that eventually about the 6th vehicle through you have the weight that can come down and complete the charge, and then it will blow a vehicle later down the line. So those are just some of the threats that we knew that we faced. We weren't worried about radio controlled because we had, I'm not going to get into the technology that we had things that could stop cell phones and other things right around us, but the command net was actually the most effective because you have a human that sees what they want to blow up, complete the charge, and that's done. And if you're in a built-up area or an urban area, it's kind of hard to figure out who it was, right? And if they're not armed, you really can't do much about it at the time unless you see them connect the IED. So we knew that these threats come from the local population. So I'm just trying to paint the mindset for us is we know that these people who we want to help are also the same people that the enemy's using those same people as a shield and also as a weapon against us, because if we retaliate with too much force, they know that those same people that we believe that we're there to help are the ones that are also going to turn against us. And by this time, they've seen people change over, so we're creating new relationships over and over, right? They're there, they've been there their whole life. I've only been there at this time a couple weeks. I don't know them, they don't know me. And you have these kids that come running out and they want to stop the vehicles. And the reason they want to stop the vehicles is they can jump in and take stuff off of us. They're kind of playing chicken with these mine rollers. Now, the drivers of these vehicles are 19, 20-year-old Marines who have brothers and sisters. And, you know, that's kind of what they see when they see these kids coming up, right? They don't want to run these kids over, but we can't stop. If you stop, it's just against your tactics, techniques, and procedures. You're a sitting duck, right? It's not good. So we have to keep moving. And they would also throw rocks at our vehicles. So you would hear the big banging of the rocks. And the strange thing about the rocks is we had rocks thrown at us before we ever shot at. And I remember the first time that we were shot at, I remember thinking, it's amazing how much the rounds, they only hit the vehicle, they sound like the rocks that the kids throw. So I first thought we were being pelted with rocks until my gunner said, hey, we're being shot at. And I was kind of ridiculous. I asked him, well, how do you know? He's like, well, I've been shot at before. I know what a round sounds like. So like, okay, so it's real. We're being shot at this time. But to go on with the civilian population, so as we're going up Route Red, what I also see are cemeteries, right? And the cemeteries are these big piles of rocks. And I remember we're taught these different, be on the lookout for different markers. Look for things for IDs, but everything looks like a marker. You have these, and you can't go through and just level a cemetery, right? You can't culturally do that. I know I would be irate if someone did that to our cemeteries. So you have things that are of cultural significance to them that we can't destroy, but also the enemy uses it against us at the same time. So what I'm trying to paint is there's a big balance that you have to make between self-preservation, protection, as well as being allied with the population that you're trying to help. So once we arrived to Shukvani, one of the things that stuck out is how people were still living in, basically they're just trying to live their life, right? And in the midst of all these different forces that are coming through and back and forth. And the area that we covered was pretty large. And some of the places that we would go through, what struck me was sometimes you'd find areas where the civilian population was friendly to you, right? They would wave to you, they would talk to you. But I also sensed nervousness about them too, because also, again, they know we're downsizing and we're going to leave. And I can put some context to that also is, so there was this patrol base called Delaram 2, which is towards the western side, towards the Iranian part of Afghanistan. And our battalion went to take it down. So Delaram 2 was torn down, and I remember reading a newspaper account on base. And this kind of summarizes my experience and kind of my frustration with Afghanistan. Is so they asked the people, so what did you think of the Marines? What did you think of the Americans? And their reply was, a lot of Americans came, a lot of Americans died to help us. They built roads, they helped us with our wells, they built everything better for us. So we know when the Americans leave, the Taliban will come back, but the Americans aren't Muslims. So it struck me as odd is that we were there under the assumption that we're there to help these people get a better quality of life, but it's kind of we're forcing this help upon the people who really don't want this help. And that's a bit of a frustration. And another example is we were building a patrol base near the Helmud River. It was for the Special Operations Forces. And we were told through intelligence that, hey, the Taliban controls this area. The population really doesn't like them. As long as we were able to knock out a few of the head honchos there, the main Taliban leaders and the main fighters, then, hey, they're all going to come to our side, right? They're going to come out. Everything's going to be great. And that really wasn't the case, right? Eventually, our battalion took and built that patrol base. And then the company, because remember I said we're downsizing, so the company was taking over battalion-sized battle spaces. The company that came in behind us, they had to launch MICLICs. And a MICLIC is basically this vehicle that you bring up towing a trailer with the line charge, which has C4 about every foot behind it. And they launched this charge, and they had to clear it, this IED belt that was encircled around this patrol base. So the locals were definitely not on the side of the Americans in that case, because they came out in support of the Taliban and helped ring this place with IEDs. So in order to just tear this place down, it got to the point where Special Operations Forces could only in and out vertically with helicopters. And again, it had to get blown up. You had to blow up this IED field just to get to it to tear it down. What that basically said to me was, and dealing with the civilians, my main dealings with civilians was with the people who were on the Camp Leatherneck, who were the local population that were selling things there, and my interpreter. And so I have a big heart for the interpreters and wanting to make sure that they're able to come to the United States. And I know I filled out paperwork to bring our interpreter over, just to figure he is in the United States, he lives in California now, but the unit behind me said they didn't want him to come because they believed that he was part of the Taliban, right? So I think that we do a pretty bad job of trusting and kind of stereotyping and labeling people also. So I think we're kind of our own worst enemies culturally at times also. Was with our interpreter, and I learned a lot through him, a lot of open conversation with him about the culture. And with the people, there was a lot of apprehension, right? They would skeptically kind of look at us. I remember we were driving down this route called Route Victoria. We're going to this place called Fob Girano. I know I'm bouncing around kind of with different places that we're going to, but this place was really eerie because we were told don't go down there because they just used the HIMARS to blow up some people in placing IEDs the day prior that we were supposed to go down there. And this was also, I guess, turned out, we found out later afterwards that there was a plot to poison the water supply at this place also. So that's common knowledge, so that can be talked about. But I remember driving down this route Victoria, named after my daughter. I didn't name that, but it's her daughter's name. I'm thinking this is crazy. This place named after my daughter, and all I see is these dust devils kicking up, and it's dusty, and you see these compounds, and they're completely empty. And then you see a small kid, about probably 9 years old, maybe between 5 and 9, walk out of a door, and you see his older brother reach through by his collar and yank him back in as they see us coming down the road. And that was a scary moment to us because, well, to me, because seeing, not everyone saw it, but seeing that is because either we're about to be attacked or they fear what we may do to them. So up to 2012, there's still not a full trust in the local community of the Americans. And the thing about it is that it comes down to is that we're told is we know you're going to leave eventually, right? They know that we're going to leave. So there's apprehension there. And and that's hard.
Okay, so you're on duty time. Now you're off duty. What do you do?
Well, off duty at Leatherneck. For me, right behind my office area, so we lived in, we had some pretty decent accommodations. There was about 4 of us to a room, and we had AC in these built up structures. And behind my office, which was the platoon headquarters, was this wooden, like, Southwest Asia hut, like a SWA hut. And I had an office, and right behind it was a gym. So I would lift weights and flip tires and bang them with a sledgehammer. And in the mornings, y'all can laugh at me, but that's okay. We would all get together and do the insanity workout, right? So we would get up at 4 in the morning, go do insanity, and then go lift weights during the day. And one of the things I'd have to say, I'd have to give credit to my company commander, was all of us platoon commanders. I was prior enlisted, so I was older than some of them, and I should have known better, right? And I agree that I made some bad judgment call on this, is that we would look for missions to send to him, to send us out to go to do certain missions. And he pulled us aside and he said, look, we're downsizing. Every time that you go outside, you're putting yourself and your Marines in jeopardy that someone may get killed. And there was a sign on our battalion area that said, somebody out there wants to kill you every time you leave. So think about going to work every day and you see a sign that says somebody wants to kill you, right? So that's kind of ingrained in your head. But what he told us was, stop looking for missions. If we need to send you, know that we're sending you because it needs to be done, not because it's just something silly for you to go get outside the wire. And that was kind of sobering. But for fun, oh my goodness. The USO was there. USO's good. We had phones. We were able to call home. We get phone cards and things. You get letters from different places, and you write as much as you can. And you basically train. Is really what you would do in your off time. And you have to come up with. You get intel reports of what the main threats are, and you come up with different tactics, techniques, and procedures to adjust to what techniques that the adversaries are using. So a lot of planning and just basically working out to get a lot of the stress out, and doing immediate action drills. So you train, right? You practice for if a vehicle is blowing up, how do you recover a vehicle? What's your procedures? So if anything does happen, you kind of kick into your training. You react instead of trying to figure out what you're going to do. So that's really what we did in what I would consider downtime.
Did the Afghan forces that you interacted with, what was kind of the themes that they wanted to talk about? What would they ask about life in the United States? Were they curious about our culture, or what was their interest, and why were they doing what they were doing?
Well, the thing for a lot of the Afghans, so the thing from the Afghan forces that the people I've gathered were a lot of them were on the opposite end of Taliban atrocities, right? They've seen what the Taliban has done, and they want to fight against that, right? They don't want that ideal, that authoritarianism over them. And it's weird because, like the one gentleman who said, hey, but they're not Muslims, right? You have some that are strict adherents to what their version of Islam is and only want that specific version. Other people, right, I guess you may call them the moderates, right, or the reformists, and they just want to have kind of a normal life, right, like the United States. They want to have the same freedoms to choose how they practice their religion, give their daughters, a lot of them was daughters, to give their daughters opportunities in school. So a lot of their theme was just basic freedoms, and that's the things that they said that they liked about the United States. And the United States staying so long, so to them, for the United States staying as long as it was, showed a commitment to them that the United States is going to stick it out, but at the same time we're starting to downsize. So it brought some fear to them as well. So it was kind of a nerve-wracking time for them.
So did you ever see any women that were representative of that would give you some idea of what they were thinking of and why they were supportive, or at least did something with regards to the forces?
I never saw, well, I did see, but I never spoke to any Afghan women. Never. It was always the men. Um, you would see them obviously out and about, but they would be completely covered still, right? Just you like with the slits and things. Um, I remember we were doing a bridge survey at this bridge in Marja, and we were taking pictures, and this guy on a motorcycle came up in the picture, and at the time, that's when I snapped the photo, and then the Afghan forces told me I needed to delete that photo because the woman was in the picture. And she was completely covered in a blue burqa from head to toe, and they said I can't have that picture because she's in it. So they made me delete that photo. They asked me. Of course, I did it. There was no relevance to it. It wasn't a fight to pick with Allied forces. But
Did you ever ask them about their attitude towards women?
some held an attitude that women were there to serve men, and others, again, with daughters, right? They would think about their daughter, which is interesting because their wife was still there to serve them, right? But they wanted a better life for their daughters. So their wives are still kind of beholden to the ideal that's supposed to happen, but they want something different for their daughters.
Interesting. And then in the context of the politics, did you see any political action that would be typical of the way things are done in Afghanistan, in your area?
So for us, we were not battle space owners, right? So you had different battalions, which became the battle space owners, and within that, you would have different, I guess you would say, tribal leaders or administrative leaders that they would deal with, right? So I never had to deal with like on the political level. They dealt with those, and we would kind of just go through those areas. We had to clear it with the battle space owner, tell them here's what we're coming through, and then they would tell the local Afghan forces, hey, here's who's coming through and when and where. And but as far as the typical politics, I never really was involved with the politics.
So how would you summarize your Afghan experience in the context of yourself as a military person, and then secondly, not that they're that separate, but just as a person? How would you summarize that experience?
So, one thing that I thought as when we were driving through, we were going through from one patrol base to the other, looking at the mud huts and seeing the animal husbandry, right? You have the goats and the sheep that are kind of pinned up inside the same compound with the people who live there. You have the irrigation ditches they're going through, and thinking the Neolithic revolution kind of stopped here, right? You had people who were able to cultivate land, get their animal husbandry, build some shelter, and they kind of just stopped, right? So that's what went through my mind in that area. When we were in, trying to remember the large city, that Lashkar Gah, going through Lashkar Gah was what you think of a city. You have people all over the place, and it was very hectic, very busy. So it's kind of like in the United States, right? You have your urban area with its culture and the rural area with its own culture, and they're kind of distinct. And I would say you see similarities to that in the United States. The people who are in their area kind of like their politics the way that they have it. They like their way. And the same thing. So the difference there is no one ever spoke about the president of Afghanistan, the nation of Afghanistan. It was always their region where they were from. It's kind of if you go back to the United States in 1840s, 50s, right? Everyone's more in line with what their state, their province. And that's what it was mostly aligned with.
Did you leave with a favorable impression of what Afghanistan looks like and where it's going, or did you leave otherwise?
I left as if we did the best that we could do. We did the job we were asked to do. But I also think what I thought was, if the people want this change, they need to make it happen, right? It can't happen without them. And as you saw in Iraq, when they had the awakening, right? When you had the tribal leaders say, all right, we're going to turn against the insurgents, you had success. In Marja, when the local people turned against the Taliban, say we're going to help the United States, they had success. And I don't know politically where things got crossed, but something went off the rails. And so for me, I thought the Afghan people were good. They're kind. I had a good impression of the Afghan people, but I fear for them because there's an authoritarian force that wants to come back and assume control over those people and that area. And I know with that vacuum, with the United States leaving, that's going to happen. So I actually really felt bad for those people. And as far as but at the same time, it's also, we were there, we were a resource that they could have used, and I don't know if they were fully committed to that, and I don't know if we were fully committed at the same time too, because at the same time, you have that changeover that happens and constantly rebuilding a relationship, and I can see that being stressful for them.